There have been recent reports in the U.S. media that the United States is considering withdrawing 4,500 troops from the Korean Peninsula. The Trump administration has said that these stories are not true, but we believe that the issue is seriously under consideration by the Pentagon and by the uniformed services. So we wanted to take a look at what this really means for defense and deterrence in the U.S. Korea alliance and on the Korean Peninsula. So the first observation that we would make is that if we look at the history of U.S. troop levels on the Korean Peninsula, the notion of removing or reducing troops on the Korean Peninsula is not something new to the alliance at all. It is actually something we have seen steadily and regularly over time. Going back as far as 1955 to 1960, there were a large number of troops on the Korean Peninsula, and under the Eisenhower administration, there was a decision made to reduce these numbers to 55,000 by 1960. The next major reduction of forces on the Korean Peninsula happened during the Nixon administration, where Richard Nixon made the decision to remove one division, the 7th Infantry Division, from Korea as part of the Nixon or Guam doctrine that called on Asian allies to take responsibility more for conventional defense and deterrence capabilities while the United States maintained the nuclear umbrella. The next major change in U.S. force levels on the peninsula happened in the post-9/11 era, when the United States was at war in Iraq, and we removed a brigade from the Korean Peninsula, deployed to Iraq, never to return. And so when we move fast forward to the present day, and we talk about U.S. troop levels now at about 23,000, if a brigade of 4,500 were removed from the Korean Peninsula, this would take troop levels in Korea down below the 20,000 mark for the first time. And so the question is, how significant is this in terms of defense and deterrence on the Korean Peninsula? So let's start with defense. I think that in terms of defense, while 4,500 is not an insignificant number, it doesn't undermine the ability to defend the Korean Peninsula. And this is largely for two reasons. The first is that the brunt of the forces in any sort of armed conflict on the Korean Peninsula would be South Korean forces, and they are a very capable military. The second is that the United States' role in this sort of situation would be largely to provide air support and overhead satellite reconnaissance and intelligence capabilities to the forces so that they could fight effectively. The United States would still have about 20,000 on the peninsula, and that is very important in order to ensure that the North Koreans understand that the United States is there and would be immediately involved in a conflict. And so from a defense perspective, the removal of a brigade is not insignificant, but at the same time, it's not fundamentally detrimental to defense on the Korean Peninsula. So the second element is deterrence, and to what extent removing a brigade can undermine the credibility of U.S. deterrence on the peninsula. And here I would say the picture is a little bit mixed. On the one hand, still having about 20,000 forces on the peninsula still constitutes the American tripwire on the Korean Peninsula to ensure that if North Korea were to ever do something, the United States would be automatically involved. That would still be there even if a brigade were to be removed. What would be left on the peninsula would be one brigade, an artillery brigade, while the striker brigade that rotated out would never come back. But in terms of credibility of deterrence, of course, it's not just about capabilities, but it's about perceptions by the adversary of the U.S. commitment. And arguably, we are at a time now when there's a lot of change taking place. North Korea is in a much more confident space, given their new relationship with Russia as a result of the war in Ukraine and lots of hard currency, military technology, energy, and other sorts of benefits that are coming from Moscow to North Korea. North Korea's relationship with China and trade levels are back up to pre-COVID levels and even more than pre-COVID levels. And in addition to that, the United States is an open question today in terms of its commitment to allies, whether we're talking about things like tariffs all the way to security commitments. And then also, as I mentioned, this reorientation by the Trump administration to focus most of the U.S. military attention on a Taiwan and First Island chain contingency rather than on something like the Korean Peninsula. And so this could create an environment in which the North Koreans feel a little bit more confident than they should be and could lead to miscalculation. And just to emphasize this point in our last slide, we want to show you here, we have collected data on the provocations by North Korea in the first 100 days of a U.S. president, starting from Richard Nixon, going all the way up to the second Trump administration. And I want to draw your attention to these two red lines here that show that actually, although it's not really well reported, in the first two Trump administrations, we have seen more North Korean provocations in the first 100 days than we've seen in any U.S. president going back to Richard Nixon. So this is just a cautionary note to say that while on the one hand, the removal of a brigade will not necessarily undermine defense capabilities, it could sort of affect, make more ambiguous the deterrent signal at a time when the North Koreans are willing to be a little bit more belligerent and provocative than we've seen in the past. Thanks for listening to our analysis, and we hope to see you soon.